My name's Camilla Pike. I'm the co-founder of Podium.me, which is a podcast platform for the voices of the under 25s.
I'm Ellie Clifford. I'm a producer and I've been working with Podium for 5 years.
The great thing about podcasts is they're relatively simple to make. Ellie will contradict me on that because she's the one actually doing the editing. But in terms of file size and ability to record, you can use your phone to record things. You can edit them on fairly basic software in your home or on your laptop. So podcasting has a very easy way in, and a lot of people are taking it up as a hobby and then also taking it to the next level as a professional product.
Yeah, I agree. I think what I really love about podcasts is that they're quite intimate. It's something very, you have to really concentrate kind of on what you're listening to. I also think it's great, I think, with people commuting and kind of, going to school, you can kind of listen to them on your way. And there's something about that where it's like that little space of time where you can be transported halfway across the world through a story, and that's just on your walk to school, which I think is really cool. And yeah, in terms of making them, like you said, I think it's amazing that you could pick up, there are lots of like professional sounding podcasts like BBC and things like NPR, but equally there's amazing podcasts where it's just a couple of people get together with their phone, put it all together with some music, and it sounds great.
I have a personal phobia of people who say, thanks so much for coming on the podcast, oh, thanks for inviting me, and all that sort of preamble. I think a great podcast goes straight into the meat of the topic really quickly and hooks the listener, because let's face it, in the first 20 seconds you're going to decide whether you're going to listen to something or not.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. One is a great story or like a great concept, so it's just about making sure that it's something that will entertain people as well as inform. I think that's just because you might be doing something news-based doesn't mean it can't be enjoyable. And then I think the other thing, speaking as a producer, is I think sound is quite important. So if you are going to record, if you can do something like use your phones to kind of, because the mic on an iPhone, for example, is brilliant. So if you can use something like that to record the sound, it'll just make it a much nicer and easier listening process, and will also make life easier for your editor who's putting it together.
One of the first things you need to do before you even think about producing a podcast is have an idea, and it's worth putting that idea into a pitch form, and that can literally be a paragraph, a title, and basically who you'd like to talk to for the podcast.
Yeah, thinking about your audience, like, what you're going to actually do with it, who's going to listen. I think that's kind of the first, it's the idea stage, isn't it, before you even get your recorder out. It's thinking about who you're going to contact, and kind of, I think it's really important with a podcast to make something that's quite well-rounded. So you might not just speak to one person, you might speak to a couple of people, and it's about thinking about how you're going to get a nice, well-rounded, balanced podcast. So I think that's kind of step one, right?
Step two is find a quiet place to record. So you need to find somewhere that doesn't have background music or loads of people chatting, and doesn't distract the listener from what's actually going on.
Yeah, I think that word distract is really important, because you could say go and record in a park if you were doing a podcast that was about nature, but you'd want to make it so that the sound kind of reflects what's going on. So if you're talking about something that is quite serious and has nothing to do with the park, then it will be distracting if people can hear birds. Equally, if you do get into a situation where you're having to record somewhere and there is a bit of a weird sound, like you might be, I did a recording recently in a museum, so obviously in the background of that interview you're going to hear people walking past. Pointing it out and saying where you are, like particularly if you've gone to a place, it's nice to point out you've gone to that place for a reason. That'll just tell the listener, oh, that's where they are, and they won't spend time thinking, where are they, as opposed to listening to what you're saying. Cool.
The next thing you need to do is prepare your questions. So you want to know roughly what you want to talk about, but don't be completely enslaved to those questions. You may want to go off on a tangent. Your interviewee may say something really interesting that you want to follow up on. So use them as a guide and make sure that you're present in the interview, not just looking down at your list going from 1 to 2 to 3.
Yeah, definitely. So then by this point you've got your plan, you're in a nice quiet place, you've got your interviewee, and so now it's time to record. And this is actually a very important part of making a podcast that I think some people neglect sometimes, but it makes basically all the difference in the world between an okay podcast and a really good podcast.
You've then got to think about editing and how you're actually going to tell a story. Nobody wants to listen to a long rambling conversation, however fascinating it was when you were there. So you've got to look through your audio, all the different clips, and be ruthless. Decide which bits definitely tell the story well and which bits you can drop. And this is actually something that you learn over time, that your favourite bit may not actually be the best bit for the story. How's your experience been with that, Ellie?
Yeah, I agree. I think sometimes what I'll do is I'll listen to the whole interview again, and then it might just be what stuck out to you, like what do you remember, because if you listen to say like maybe a 20 or 30 minute conversation you've had with that guest and there are 3 key things that really jump out at you, then it's likely those are going to be the 3 things that are most interesting to kind kind of the listener. And equally thinking about your narrative, like I said, if you've got this well-rounded and balanced set of interviewees, but then you only take the clips from where they all agree and say the same thing, then you haven't actually created that nice well-rounded interview.
There are so many skills that you gain from producing a podcast. You may well not become a journalist, but what you will gain is the ability to step out of your comfort zone, to talk to people that you haven't spoken to before, to research a story. These are all skills that are useful in any career that you want to go into.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm biased because the first podcast I made was for Podium and I ended up loving it, and now I'm doing it as a career. So you might find that actually you love it and you really want to get into it. But I think there's something amazing about podcasting. Like I said before, it's, anyone can pick it up and do it. You can create something that's about your favourite topic, and like, why wouldn't you? And you might find out that if you reach out to people and say, hey, I'm making this podcast about my favourite subject ever, someone who you really respect might come back to you and be like, actually, yes, like, come and I'm happy to talk to you. And I think basically it's daunting when you first start out to think, I've never made one before, people aren't going to want to speak to me, but you'd be surprised about how many people are happy to give up some of their time to come and talk to you about an issue that you're passionate about.